Yes, indeed, folks, you listen to Blue Please. You're on WoW Radio with myself, Total Biscuit. Now, I've got a little bit of a mission for you before I go on to the next little discussion topic. I have a line graph for this one. It's really good. I'm very professional for this one. It's like a presentation to the corporate board. I want you to head on over to buff.net, because buff.net is going to succeed or fail based entirely on whether or not the community is actually, buffing things. If you've ever used dig.com, you know exactly what buff.net's about. Yeah? There's stories on the front page, there's stories on the upcoming tales, you can submit your own stories, and if you like it, you buff it. So, the best stories get the most popular stuff. And again, like I was saying earlier in the show, I've had the opportunity to read some blogs that I otherwise would not have read as a result of looking at this site. So I want you to all go over there right now, every last one of you. Go on, type it in. You're listening to the show on the podcast, you listen to it live. Go on, buffd.net. Go do it. It'll only take you 5 seconds of your time. Have a look. Have a look on the front page. See if there's anything that interests you. Maybe there's something in upcoming, and I want you to go buff something. Just one thing. Find something you like and buff it. Because you know what? You might actually get an awful lot out of this site. I'm finding the ability to find news stories a heck of a lot easier as a direct result of this. Now, I don't have to go on some terrible AOL-owned site whose name shall not be uttered on this show. Indeed, because if you mention it, it makes glass crack like this. It's horrendous, and you end up having to clean it up. It's a health and safety hazard. They who shall not be named. Anyway, let's get on with this. I read the forums. I don't know why. One of these days I'll figure out why it is that I do it. I got myself banned again, by the way. This is like the 20th time. So if any of the CM team are listening, hi! Sorry, again. Actually, no, I'm not going to apologise for this one. You want the ban reason? I'll give you the ban reason. You guys are always entertained by this kind of thing. And if you're not, well, you are not one of my fans. Oh, no. Right. Let me log into my forum account. And I shall give you the ban reason. Because personally, I found this the most hilarious eggshell walking rubbish. Come on, forums. You know you want to. There we go. Temporary ban until the 18th of August 2009. Posting harassing and defamatory language towards others. Quote, targeting another individual to cause distress, embarrassment, unwanted attention, or other personal discomfort, i.e. harassment. And the quote is this. Now, the thread was by a guy who said, why is Ogrimmar locked for my DK? And posts this terribly spelled gibberish. Basically, he didn't finish the Wrathgate quest, and this is a obvious thing to anyone. You can search the internet, just search, why is Org locked, and you'll find it on Google, the first entry. Search the forums, you'll find it. Search the new player stuff. And indeed, if you understand how the quests work, because you read the quest text, then you'd be okay. So he posts, why is it locked? So I post, read the frigging quest text and stop asking stupid questions, maybe. That's assuming you're talking about what I think you're talking about, and I can't be sure, because you're about as descriptive as a crayon drawing of a printed circuit board. That got me a 3-week ban. Wow. I'm sorry, I'm not dealing with toddlers here. I can't go into a playground, make a scary monster face, and suddenly all the kids scream and start crying. It doesn't work that way. I'm dealing with people who are at least, I would imagine, old enough to get a subscription to a game on the internet, which requires you to pay a monthly fee. Now, if that's paid for by their parents, that ain't my problem. I'm not going to tippy-toe around people's feelings just because the guy on the other end might be 5 years old. Not my problem. I shouldn't have to deal with that rubbish. So yeah, if you're listening, CM team, come on, really? That was the best you could come up with? I actually had a great email from Thungott, but of course I'm not going to read that on air. But he made some valid points, but I still think he's a soft touch. Good lord. Seriously. Be a little bit more harsh with the idiots on your forums. You'll have a better forum to moderate. It won't be full of repeat threads and idiotic questions. How I recruit friend? When is player housing? How I free TBC? Oh, my eyes are bleeding out of my face. They're trying to escape the stupidity. I suppose the ban is a nice temporary reprieve. Now, speaking of stupidity, this is what I saw in the forums. This was in an interesting topic that I was reading. Now, this is something I discussed with our new host, Natural 20, over dinner. He does Just Plain Better on Mondays. You should listen. He was in Newcastle, so we had lunch, and we talked about various things, and he was actually in the debating contest. And he was talking to me about how debates work, and I was sharing my knowledge as well, because I've done a bit of it in law, and of course we get taught about the burden of proof in law. Now, how this relates to this thread is some guy posted, Wrath of the Lich... His proposition is this: Wrath of the Lich King is the hardest ever. Now, I don't necessarily agree with that, but the content of his post I did agree with. And what he did was he provided a bunch of statistics. Now, we discussed these statistics weeks ago, when I did an analysis of the number of people that have beaten each boss in Ulduar. Yeah? So this is a nice follow-up to that. And his analysis concluded that, yes, Wrath of the Lich King raid content was hard, and by hard we're talking about Ulduar, of course. We're not really talking about Nax here. We're talking about Malagos, Sarth 3D, indeed, even Sarth 1D, and Ulduar content. That was all hard, apparently. And he backed that up by presenting these statistics. And he rationalized each statistic. And to me, that's a reasonable opener, yeah? That he's satisfied the burden of proof, the initial burden of proof, by providing a good, solid piece of factual analysis of a set of statistics. Thereby, it is up for everyone else, of course, to disprove it. Could they? No. No, they could not. They came up with the most bizarre rationalizations. You know, what I like, the best one was, the only reason, yeah, this came from the same guy, as I'm about to talk to you about. And a couple of people actually backed him up on this. The only reason that Yogg-Saron has only been killed by 5% of the raiding guild population is that 95% of the raiding guild population doesn't have time. Really? And of course, my counter-argument to this was quite simple. Okay then, if you're claiming that, in fact, Wrath of the Lich King raid content, beyond Nax, we're not talking about difficulty here, we're just talking about time, then would you mind explaining to me exactly how only 19% of the raiding player base has done Malagos 25? A 10-minute fight with no trash? You want to explain that? Go on, try. Please, by all means, entertain me. Yeah, it was rubbish. Now, the same guy made this bizarre claim. Absolutely bizarre claim. And the claim was this: Ulduar, with the exception of Flame Leviathan and Yogg-Saron, yeah, so I'll be fair, I'll give him his due, without Flame Leviathan, as in without the easiest and the hardest boss, of course, without counting Algernon or any of the hard modes whatsoever, is a flat difficulty curve. As in, there is no increase whatsoever, or variation in difficulty, from Razor Scale to General Vezax. Not one. And don't think that I'm manipulating what he's saying here. No, this is actually what he said. And anyone that was reading this thread will attest to that. That he actually claimed that it was a flat difficulty level. And the mind boggled. I mean, I've been raiding for a very long time. I've done pretty much everything except for Sunwell, because, hey, I quit before Sunwell even came out. I went on a hiatus for like 9 months before Wrath's release. So I've seen how Blizzard designs their raid instances. There are two kinds of raid instance, yeah? There's the Naxxramas style of raid instance, which is a non-linear winged instance. And what that means is that you can do it in a nondescript order. Thereby, the difficulty level of it is not going to be a uphill slope. You're going to have maybe a couple of initial easy bosses, but that's not necessarily the case. I mean, for instance, you look at the Abomination Wing. Patchwork. I'm maybe talking about old Patchwork, not new Patchwork here. But I suppose it really applies to new Patchwork to some degree as well. Patchwork is easier than Globulus. Arguably... No, actually that's not true at all. Let's get it the right way around, shall we? You see how much I hate remembering Nax? You see how much it rotted my brain? Maybe we say stupid things. Ugh. News just in, folks. Hogger more difficult than Kel'Thuzad, more 11. So, Globulus, less difficult than Patchwork. Arguably Gluff, less difficult than Patchwork. Then Thaddeus, more difficult than Patchwork. So, you don't have a curve there, you've got difficulty here, then down, then slightly up, but not as difficult as Patchwork, then whee, all the way up to 30 years. So yeah, that's a winged design. So the difficulty is going to vary. It's going to be all over the damn shop. And then you have a linear design. And the linear design, we're talking about stuff like Blackwing Lair, we're talking about stuff like AQ40, we're talking about stuff like Ulduar, we're talking about stuff like Mount Hyjal. All relatively linear instances. That where you'll do bosses in a specific order because you don't really have a choice in the matter. Now, the linearity varies. For instance, there are some like Mount Hyjal where you fight all 5 bosses in exactly the same order. There are some like Black Temple where you will absolutely fight 3 bosses in the same order, then you can maybe change it around a bit, but then you fight more bosses in the same order. So, that's not a non-linear instance, that's just a slightly varied progression path through one instance. Not the same thing. Now, generally speaking, through all of these dungeons, you had, with very few exceptions, a progression path where the curve of difficulty went upwards. And that made perfect sense, of course. The logic being quite simple. You want to provide a reasonably long learning experience for everyone because that's the content you expect them to deal with for the next X number of months. So say AQ40. Or indeed anything. Anything like that. You look at a boss, followed by a boss which is harder, followed by a boss which is harder, followed by a boss which is harder, and there might be a little bit of variance because, you know, some difficulty is not necessarily completely objective. You can analyze the various mechanics of fights, and you can come to a conclusion of just how difficult a fight is based on those mechanics. But sometimes some guilds will find fights easier than others. In other words, a degree of subjectivity there. So you can't always argue that, yes, this boss is this difficulty, this boss is this difficulty. What you can do is have a look at the sort of general difficulty curve. And the reason that you don't have a bunch of bosses after a hard boss that are easy is because those bosses get crunched. Yeah, they get absolutely mauled in a very short period of time, which means the amount of time that you've spent designing those bosses, creating the art assets and stuff like that, building the fight, was actually a waste. Because you might as well have created one hard boss, because it would have taken these guys longer to beat that one hard boss than it would to beat these 3 easy bosses. Blackwing Lair was an example of where they went wrong with this. And it's funny, because you look at the way Blackwing Lair was designed, and you think, actually, maybe the 3 Drakes, yeah? Flamegore, Ebonrock, and Firemaw, not in that order, of course. That's actually in reverse order. It's actually in reverse order of difficulty as well, I might add. Those bosses all looked exactly the same. They were like filler bosses, right? And it's like Blizzard actually knew that after you've beaten stuff like Razorgore and Veilstraz, you're going to be able to stomp these guys into the ground. They're free loot bosses. Now, loot pinatas, of course, serve a practical purpose. There are some bosses that could be classified as loot pinatas. Shade of Akama, prime example. Yeah? But generally speaking, they are the exceptions that prove the rule. Why? Because it's nice to sometimes offer a little bit of a break in the progression curve, in the difficulty curve. But if you look at Ulduar, I don't believe that you could sanely argue, from any kind of rational perspective, that it was a flat difficulty level. Yeah? You get your first major challenge in the form of XT002. From there, stuff does get harder. Iron Council is, in my opinion, harder than XT002. I'd say Kolaghan is about on the same difficulty level as XT002. About the same. Araya, slightly more difficult. I don't know how you pronounce that. Then, of course, you've got the 4 Keepers, who, they're not the same difficulty level, but the order you do them in, you know, you go from the easiest to the hardest. You'll generally do Hodir, then Freya, then Thorim, and then Mimiron, who are all in that order, as far as I'm concerned, difficulty. Now, if you go on the IRC channel or go on my blog, blueplease.blogspot.com, you'll see a line graph that I came up with that comes up with some subjective difficulty levels in comparison to the number of people that have actually defeated it. Now, what you can see there is a curve going upwards combined with a curve going downwards. And the curve going downwards is the number of people who have actually beaten that stuff. And I think what you will see is that, yes, absolutely, Ulduar does have a difficulty curve. Now, what's my point? What is the point that I'm coming to here? Well, the point is that when you look at Ulduar, and when we look back at Ulduar having gone several raid instances in, I think what we will genuinely see is an instance that was very well designed in terms of the way that the difficulty gradually sloped upwards, and a properly equipped guild that was smart and had the dedication is entirely capable of beating Ulduar in a reasonable length of time. And they are not going to steamroll it. And the bizarre argument from some, and I'm going to use the word here, elitist raiders, is that Ulduar is somehow easy, is absolutely ridiculous, and that actually harms the cause. It throws a spanner into the works of trying to come up with reasonable content that is suitable for all and provides a reasonable challenge with reasonable rewards, which is, of course, in my opinion, what everyone should be asking for. And if you don't like it, and if you don't want that, then you're stupid, and you're ruining the damn game. I'll be back after this, folks. Enjoy.